Good evening. Daf Dalet Amud Aleph on the top. So the last thing we said was Shen and Keren were different in that Shen has Hana'ah when it's eating, right? Tooth. It gets Hana'ah when it eats. And Keren, it's different than Shen because it's intentionally damaging. So the Gemara says, 1 second, if that's the case, V'lav kava chomer is not a kava chomer, but umash shen she'eni kavan to hazik neyav. If in shen the animal has no kavanah, has no intention of damaging, and yet you're chayav, you should have a kava chomer. Keren shekav to hazik lo kol shekin. Keren, where there is kavanah to attack and to damage, he for sure should be chayav. So why would you need keren if you could learn it out from shen? So the Gemara says, you need both. You might be thinking maybe it's similar to the case of damage from a eved or a slave woman. Because regarding an eved and a slave and a slave woman, even though they have intention to damage, the masters are patur. Right? So get into that. But right now, so maybe over here you might think regarding the ox with the keren, even though it has kavanah, maybe patur. Who has to field that money? That's a question for them. Okay, so therefore it's necessary to teach you that the animal you're chayav, even though the eved you're not. Amar Avashe atu eved v'amah lafta ma'adeba eat behu. 1 second, eved and amah is a different reason why they're patur. Shema yektinen rabo b'yedach ve'adlik gidish shachavro. Because why? If the owner was chayav, maybe the master might get the slave angry on purpose. Sorry, if the master were to get the slave angry, what would he do? He would go and light the neighbor's house on fire and say, "Ha, you paid for it." Right? So that's the reason why the master's patur. The reason why the master's patur is because let's say one day the master gave him a crazy job. Right? Go clean out the stable with all the horse poop. So now he's all upset. He's like, "Oh yeah, you making me do this?" He goes next door, lights the house on fire. Okay, $2 million bill for the master. That's why you're patur, because we don't want the eved to do that to the master. The guy could make his master have so much money every single day. So therefore, technically, the kavod chomer should go back on, because the only reason why he's patur is for a different reason. Gemara says no. The nature of keren is intention to damage, but it's not similar not similar to the nature of shen, where there's no intention to damage. And yet, the nature of shen, where it gets hana'ah, is not similar to the nature of keren, where there is no hana'ah. Right? So they doubled it up on both sides. One has a plus, one has a minus, and one has a plus and a minus in regarding to kavanah and hana'ah. Okay. Veregel mai. Shayere, right? Why, if we know that regular type of damage, and we know that according to the Gemara's explanation of Shmuel, ox is referring to keren, shor is keren, and mav is referring to shen. So how come we don't mention regel in the Mishnah according to that opinion? When the Mishnah says it damages, the guy is chayav, that includes regel, right? So that extra line in the Mishnah where it's extra. If it damages your chayav, that's including regel. So okay, why are you hiding it? Let it say it straight out. The Mishnah taught ox for regel and mav'eh for shen. How do you explain the Mishnah? You explain it as follows. The nature of regel, which is damaging, is common when it walks, is not comparable, not similar to Shen, which is not as common. And the nature of Shen, which is, there is Hana, is not comparable, or it's not similar to where there's no Hana. Therefore, you need to teach both. The Keren, how come Keren was not mentioned in Shayare? How come the Mishnah didn't mention it out, right? When it says it, similar answer. When it damages, the damager is chayav, that also includes keren. Same question, write it straight up. Why are you hiding it? When it says Mishnah is referring to cases of mu'ad. only muad. Yani muad from step one. In regarding to cases where you could start off as a tam, right? A non-naturally attacking animal is a tam. So keren has 3 strikes and you're out. Keren, if it gores 3 times when it's a tam, it becomes a muad. That's why the Mishnah didn't mention it, because our Mishnah is referring to cases where you're automatically have full payment because it is already a muad. Keren doesn't have that. You have to develop that. Okay. Right? So now we know why Rav doesn't like Shmuel, but how come Shmuel doesn't like Rav? He said, Adam, right? I don't want to say that Mav is Adam, like you said, because if that was the case, Haktani Sefer, the next part of the Mishnah doesn't make sense. Why? Shor hamuad v'shor hamazik b'shut hanizak v'ha'adam. A muad ox, and the ox that damages on property, and men, you're all chayav as muadin, right? A muad ox, walking ox, and a man is all chayav. So if we already mentioned it as mav'eh, why would you need another case of adam later on? So the Gemara says, "V'litnei b'reisha." So why wouldn't it mention adam in the beginning? Straight up, Benis came amon kamairi. The reason why in the beginning of the Mishnah is referring to damaging, avot of damaging, but avot damaging from your property, animals, boar, etc. But we're not talking about people's damaging. Gemara says, according to Rav, how does he explain the Mishnah? How do you say it's mav'eh if later on in the Mishnah it is it says man as well? The Gemara says, Amar Rav, Rav says, when it mentions that man over there, that's just teaching it to you that you count it as muad. So it's not a chidush, meaning it's true muad is in the beginning, but later on it's teaching you that adam is always muad. And according to Rav, why Mishnah said the ox is not like mav'eh. Hachi kamar. This is what the Mishnah is saying. An ox, if it kills a person, is chayav in kofer. Right? We in the beginning of the Mishnah, in our Mishnah, it mentioned like, oh, this one's not comparable to that one. So how would it fit with mav'eh if mav'eh was a person? We say, oh, very simple. The ox is not similar to a person because if an ox kills, the owner has to pay something called kofer, has to pay the value of that person that was killed. Which is not applied to a person who kills another person. He doesn't pay kofer. He gets killed. So therefore, it's not comparable. And regarding to a person who damages, he also is not similar because he has to pay for 4 things, right? 4 or 5 payments. He has to pay for embarrassment, pain, healing, and unemployment. And if a short damages, you don't have to pay all those. That's why they're not comparable. Okay, the Mishnah then says, okay, let's try to read out the rest of the Mishnah according to Rav, right? So the Rav said it's a person. So now let's read the Mishnah. So according to the Mishnah, let's read the end. The common denominator to know all the avot is that they are naturally damaged. So now the Gemara says 1 second. If shor means keren, it doesn't make sense. Keren doesn't naturally damage. So we know b'muad. It's referring to it as muad. But even if it's muad, it doesn't mean it's naturally damaged, right? Let's compare it. A case of regel. Why is that considered naturally damaging? Because it walks. It always walks. An animal walks in the street. If something's in its way, it's going to get damaged. It's not going to step over your iPhone because it sees it on the floor. It's not going to step over it. So an animal naturally damages when it walks. So the Gemara is saying over here, even if an animal is mu'ad, he's not goring everything in sight. He's not going to gore the wall. He's not going to gore every single thing he sees. It's not a natural thing to do. When it says kevan di'ayid urchahu, we say no. We thought it's not true. Once it is a mu'ad, it is usual behavior. So I'm not saying it goring everything in his path, but it is aggressive. If it sees something it doesn't like, it's gonna gore. So Adam darkol azik. If you tell me Adam is maveh, is it also common for a man to damage damage nature? We don't damage stuff all day. The one says Yashin is referring to the guy who's sleeping. Yashin darkol azik is the guy who's sleeping really damaged. When it says Kevan de Kayef Bashit Orchehu, a person who's sleeping, he's stretching, he's moving, he's something on the bed or someone next to him, it's naturally be broken. I don't know if my kids, when they sleep, they travel miles. I literally go to my son's bed and multiple times a night and move him back into position. So people when they're in their bed, they're sleeping or on the floor, whatever it is, if there's something next to them, it can easily break. The Mishnah. Now let's finish off the Mishnah according to Rav. The last part of the Mishnah says the watching is on your responsibility. So now, if you tell me it's an Adam, it's a person, Adam Shmirat Gufo Alavu, right? How can you tell me that it's Mav'eh, right? Arba Avot, there's four main things: an animal, that are not, and a man. And at the end, everything's compared to each other. They all have the common denominator that you have to watch it. You have to watch yourself. What does that mean? The Lashon doesn't fit. The Gemara says, according to Shmuel, right? He has the same problem. The next Braita, which Karna taught, right? It mentions the four Avot and it mentions a man. Adam Shemud before Avu. Same problem. He also has Adam, even according to that Braita. Rather, if they answered like Rabbi Abahu said to hit the Braita, Rabbi the Braita, he explained it as follows: Tini Adam Shmirat Gufu Alav. Fix it. Yes, your property is your responsibility. But regarding man, it's also you are responsible on yourself. Right. So they ended up the question that we asked on one of them ended up being a question on both. Hachanami also over here. We have to amend the Mishnah. We have to explain the Mishnah that is referring to the guy who does have to watch himself. You are responsible on yourself, and even if you're sleeping, you are still responsible. Okay, Matkif of Mari. Right, so Rav and Shmuel both said different cases of Mav'eh. Rav Mari wants to say, Ve'eman Mav'eh ze hamayim. Maybe Mav'eh is water. Why? Because as fire burns, the water bubbles fire. Right? So the word bubbles, yani boiling, is also used by fire with water. I mean, the Gemara says miktiv mayim nivu doesn't say the water is bubbling fire. The fire is bubbling, right? So they're trying to say, oh, the word mayim is next to mav'eh, but the Gemara says no, but the bubbling is coming from the fire, not from the water. So therefore you can't tell me it's referring to the water. The Gemara says matkit harav zvid. Ve'ema mav'eh ze ha'esh. Let's say mav'eh is fire. So if that's the case, let's use that word mav'eh to teach you fire. Where it says, you can't tell me it means fire because the next one is fire, right? The Mishnah said four things, and the last two was mav'eh and fire. So what? There's two fires in the Mishnah. Why would you need two in the same case? So the Gemara says, and even if you want to tell me that the Mishnah is explaining itself, it says mav'eh, and then it says hev'er to explain what mav'eh is, right? So mav'eh, what's mav'eh? Hev'er, fire. But that's still a problem. Why? Because you only have. That means you have three things. Because you're counting mav'er and hever twice, that means you have short and bor. So the Gemara says, it's not four, it's three. Maybe you might think that it is four, because when it says shor, it could include two, right? It could include shen and regel. The Gemara says, it doesn't make sense, because if mav'er is referring to fire, that the last part of the Mishnah, which said that the ox is not comparable to mav'eh, because esh and mav'eh esh does not have ruach hayim, but mav'eh does. So esh esh, right? So first of all, it contrasted it against mav'eh. So, but there wouldn't be any hayim, there wouldn't be no life in mav'eh. That's number one. Number two, we compared mav'eh against the esh, hever. So therefore, that also is a problem. It's the same thing. It wouldn't be the same exact. You wouldn't contrast against each other. So let's go ahead. Rav said there are 13 primary damages. Shomer chinam v'hashoel v'noseh sachar v'hasocher. Sorry, a guy who's watching something for free. If I give my cup to Mark, I say, "Hey, watch this. Do me a favor, watch this." Next one is someone who borrowed something. The next level is someone who's being paid to watch something. And the last level is someone who's renting something. Nezek, tzar, right? Someone has to pay actual damages. Someone has to pay pain, damages, ripui, doctor bills, healing, shevet, unemployment, the guy can't work because you hurt his arm, boshet, humiliation, and additionally the 9 of the Mishnah, the 4 of the Mishnah, hat lezar, which is 13. Right, so these are the 13 damage-related halachot. Right, so you can see from here how important it's not to embarrass someone. You have to pay someone for embarrassment if you damaged him. Why come our Mishnah only mentioned 4, not the other 9? Based on what Shmuel makes sense, according to Shmuel, right? Because he explained it as Shen, and therefore we're mentioning damages of your property. We're not talking about people's damages. But according to Rav, is a person. How come we don't mention all 13? Mar says Adam. So he says no. When it mentions man, it means all the halachot of man, including all those tsar, ripui, shevet, boshet, etc. So Mar says Rabbi Oshia nami hatani litla adam. According to Oshia, Ma'ez, one man, so how come he would need to mention them separately? So Tere Gavni Adam. Rav Oshia is saying there's 2 different types of damages by a person. Tame Adam da'azik Adam, Tame Adam da'azik shor. It's referring to a case where a guy damages another person, and then another guy damages an ox or property, right? So let's say the first few cases would only apply by a man damaging property, but if a guy damages another person, you would add those other halachot of embarrassment and pain, etc. Maybe Rabbi Oshia should also mention 2 categories of an ox. Litnei shor, the azik shor, litnei shor, the azik adam. There should be one category of a guy, ox, damaging another ox or property, and then another category of an ox is damaging another person, right? Because we know that there's a separate halacha of an ox kills a person. You say, "Hi, Mai, what kind of question is that?" Adam, the azik shor, nezek mishlim. A guy who, let's say, kills an ox. He's paying for damage. A guy who damages another person pays for 4 additional items: pain, healing, suffering, and humiliation and unemployment. Sorry. Ela shor, but regarding to an ox, mali shor dazik shor, mali shor dazik adam. There's no real difference in halachot of payment. You're still paying damage, right? Whether it's kofar or not, you're still paying damage. However, a person who's damaging another person is different because he has to pay extra. He has to pay extra payments for the guy's feelings. You say 1 second. That's not true, because in the cases of a watched or borrowed item, it's halacha of a guy who's damaging a property, and Rabbi Yoshia taught them in separate categories. So we say no. Tani hezeka de b'yadayim, tani hezeka de mela. There's different types of damaging versus property. There's direct damage. You actually broke an item. And then there's indirect damage. You didn't watch the item correctly and it was robbed or destroyed. There are 24 different items. Tashlume kefel, paying double payment, right? In the case of someone stole something and then they were brought to a Bedin and he swore that he didn't steal it and they found it in his possession, he has to pay double for swearing falsely. Someone has to pay 4 or 5 times, right? If someone steals a small animal or large animal, if he stole a small one, he has to pay 5 times. If he stole the big one, he has to pay 4 times. If he slaughtered it, the reason being because if you carry the big one, it's already embarrassment, so you only have to pay 4 times. Veganav, a thief. Vegazlan, a robber. Right? There's a difference between a thief and a robber. A thief is a guy who a robber is a guy who will even rob someone during the day, and a thief will rob someone at nighttime so he doesn't get caught. But edim zamamin are witnesses that were caught lying by a certain way only. So if usual there was 2 witnesses saying A, 2 witnesses saying B, they cancel each other out. The only time it's not going to be power 2 witnesses over another 2 witnesses is if those first 2 witnesses are told by the second witnesses, "Hey, how did you testify on that? You were with us." Then they win. They knock him out. But how nice, the rapist has to pay money. A guy who seduces someone else's daughter has to pay money. Someone who says that his new wife was a be'ula. She was not a betula. Someone who makes someone else's stuff. Someone who mixes tiruma with someone else's other property, other fruits, which makes it a problem. Safek. Someone makes other wine. And then the 13 of Oshia, so he added another 11 categories. But Oshia, how come Rosh didn't mention these other 11? The Gemara says, but Momona Kamari bekansa lo Kamari. He says, I only mentioned cases of actual payments. These other 11 are all kanas. So it's like but regarding a thief and a robber who stole something to pay back, it's also mamon. It's not a kanas. Litany. Should have mentioned it. So, he already mentioned the case of a shomer chinam, a guy who wants something for free, and someone who's borrowing something. In that case, is included because in that case is referring to where a guy decided to keep the item he was watching or renting or borrowing, and then he ended up getting caught. We'll do a little more. But why didn't he? If he already taught the shomer chinam and shoel, why didn't he need another case of robber and thief? He says, he wanted to bring the two different cases of robber and thief, because in the case of the borrower and lender and the watcher, he received that money or item through a heter way. It was willingly given to him, and then he tried to steal it. In the thief or robber, it came to him through isur by stealing it in the first place. Okay, we'll stop him at the top of Ham.